Well, right now, I don't think Dan Lanning is a top 5 coach in the Pac-12. And that's okay. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Busy Monday. We're talking about Dan Lanning, how much better the Ducks are right now, and another curious incident in the transfer portal world, this time on the basketball court. We'll talk about that later on today's show. But recently, here at the Locked On Network, we did some voting, and I did get to vote in these, so it was not exclusively my vote, not exclusively my rankings, but these rankings did pretty closely reflect how I feel about the coaches in the Pac-12, who I do talk about and study and observe and read about and yada, yada, yada quite a bit over at Locked On Pac-12, which I also host if you did not know, but the hosts at Locked On, those who are pertaining to the Pac-12 conference and actually, have an understanding. For example, I did not vote on the Big 12 coaches rankings, voted on who the best coaches in the conference are right now, and Dan Lanning did not crack the top 5. And not only do I not think that's ridiculous, I personally did not vote for Lanning to be in the top 5 because I'm not trying to just be a homer and vote for the Oregon guy because I'm an Oregon fan, trying to have some honest intellectual conversations here with regards to college football. So for those watching on YouTube, the rankings shake out as follows according to the hosts here at Locked On. That's Lincoln Riley, number 1, is the best head coach in the Pac-12. Kyle Whittingham, number 2. Kalen DeBoer, number 3. Jonathan Smith, number 4. And Chip Kelly at number 5. So a lot of different ways you can go about determining who you feel is the best coach in a given conference. You will notice on here, and I am big on this, head-to-head is not a top determining factor for whether or not one coach is better than another coach. Because one coach might dominate this other coach over here, but he's at a more prestigious program, has better players, has more access to, better recruits and whatnot, can get more guys in the transfer portal, doing more with less, a statement I think you hear a lot in college football, understandably, especially nowadays with NIL and the portal. I think all of that factors into this sort of stuff. But Lincoln Riley coming in at number 1. This was a frequently, often, and continuously debated topic amongst some of you over the weekend that kind of got people riled up a bit. But I think Lincoln Riley, followed by Kyle Whittingham, followed by Kalen DeBoer, Jonathan Smith, and then Chip Kelly, is pretty darn good. Now, my top 5 list looked just a little bit different. It was Lincoln Riley, number 1. Sue me. Some people might not like that. And you know what? That's okay. Kyle Whittingham, number 2. I had Jonathan Smith, 3. Kalen DeBoer, 4. And Chip Kelly, 5. Now, my reasoning behind that is that if you were looking at what makes a coach successful, my criteria go as follows. Success on the field contrasted with program tradition and capability and what the expectations are. Recruiting, definitely a part of it. And then the third consideration I put in there is schematics / implementing an identity as a coach. I think a well-coached football team, or every team that really is successful, takes on the identity of their head coach, because it's that coach understanding how to implement that vision and how he wants to craft the roster accordingly to make the team as successful as possible in his mold. So you think of a Lincoln Riley team, and this past season, they were a Lincoln Riley team. They scored a bunch of points. They had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and they couldn't get a stop on defense. They still won 11 football games and were one half of football against Utah away from going to the college football playoff in year one. Now, yes, he's at USC, and that was the most debated point is, where does Lincoln Riley fall? Which brings me to a point that, Josh Pate lays out on the Late Kick podcast, which I think is fantastic, by the way. I'm a big Josh Pate fan. He makes a great point about what makes a coach overrated or underrated. So-and-so's overrated. Who would you put ahead of him that is ranked behind him? Now, some people might say Kyle Whittingham. That's totally fair. I understand it. I don't particularly agree with that assessment, though I think Witt is amazing, and I think Witt is certainly number 2 in there. But my top 5 would be Lincoln Riley, Kyle Whittingham, Jonathan Smith, then Kalen DeBoer, then Chip Kelly. Now, DeBoer should get a lot of credit for the turnaround he had a year ago, but I put Smith a notch above him because, number one, DeBoer has to prove it wasn't a flash in the pan, which I seriously doubt, still has to be proven. But number 2, what was my number 1 criteria, and frankly the biggest criteria that I'm evaluating these coaches on? Program success and tradition and what you did with what you had. Jonathan Smith took over a 1-11 football team, one of the worst Power 5 teams we have ever seen. They should have gone 0-12. They almost lost to Portland State. They were a disaster. But they weren't just a disaster. They were a mess in Corvallis. They were a mess at Oregon State. They were a mess at a program that until this past year hadn't won 10 games since 2006. That's different than taking over a mess at Washington or USC, and is, frankly, a candidate to have him higher on this list. But is Utah a program where I would feel comfortable taking the 2-time defending coach of the year or 2-time defending champs and their head coach and everything that he's guided them through and putting him lower than 2 on this list? Absolutely not. But if I had my choice of any coach in this conference to start, like, let's say an expansion, Pac-12 team, for instance, Lincoln Riley would be my number 1 choice. And part of coaching, by the way, in college football and how I'm evaluating you, criteria number 2 on my list, recruiting. That includes the transfer portal. So I saw a lot of debate. There was a long running debate, kept me in the mentions for a while. It was interesting, but I bowed out like a day and a half before everybody else did. But there was a long running debate about, Oklahoma was just bad after Lincoln Riley left because he took all the good players with him. Yeah, that's kind of the point. We love Dan Lanning, who I'm going to get to more in just a sec. We love Dan Lanning because he can go out and get good players in the portal, because he can go out and recruit a high level of high school players. And not every coach in the country can do that. And that is part of how you should be evaluated as a college football coach. Because some guys, like Mario, are more recruiting than scheme guys. Some guys are more scheme than recruiting, right? I think Lincoln Riley falls in that category, though he has historically recruited at a pretty high level. Though kind of hard to know for sure because he's been at Oklahoma and USC. Now, Oklahoma doesn't have a bunch of talent in their backyard, but they're close to Texas, so they do have that going for them. And, those are both really, really big brands in that sense. But that's the way the list works out. I'll throw it up one more time here for those watching on YouTube. Lincoln Riley, Kyle Whittingham, Kalen DeBoer, Jonathan Smith, Chip Kelly, according to the hosts here at the Locked On Network. I flip-flopped in my voting list Jonathan Smith and Kalen DeBoer because I think Smith to this point has done a little bit more with a little bit less. Washington still had talent. They were just grossly miscoached the season prior, but still that big-time turnaround was really, really impressive. But Spencer, why are you not putting Dan Lanning in the top 5? Why is he not in there? There are a couple reasons for that. Now, the reason that you haven't gone and checked out FanDuel yet, I can't help you with that because baseball season's in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Don't miss your chance to get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Go get your gambling fix on with FanDuel today. Boy, we always need the second segment sip. By the way, I kid you not, before I came on to record this show, this is a true story. Before I hit the record button, I was just playing music on my phone while I was getting everything set up. And Defying Gravity from the Wicked soundtrack came on. And I was full on lip sync karaokeing right into this same camera right here. And I promise you that happened. I can also promise you I will never do it while that record button tells me that I'm taping an actual show right now. So let's get back into it, shall we? We've had our second segment sip, and we're ready to continue locked and loaded. Now, I don't think that it would be unreasonable to think Lanning is a top 5 coach in the Pac-12 right now, which is kind of arbitrary because top 5 kind of implies there are a lot more, but top 5 at least isn't just being in the top half. I think Lanning is probably number 6, frankly. But if you disagree with the notion that Lanning is top, and by the way, in a year's time, he could catapult up this list. But right now, if you disagree with my assessment and those of the hosts here at the Locked On Network that Lanning is not a top 5 coach in the Pac-12, just ask yourself this question. How did you feel about Oregon's 2022 season? The way that I have often described it is standard, solid, meets expectations, does not exceed them. All of those other coaches at one point in time during their tenures have exceeded expectations. And so the reason, another reason as well, that Lanning is not on this list is because, number one, he wasn't taking over a bad situation. But number two, he only has had one season to kind of show what he's got. And when you compare it to the other coaches in the Pac-12, the other 2 first-year coaches are Lincoln Riley, who went from 4-8 to 11-3, and Kalen DeBoer, who went from 4-8 to 11-2. Lanning went from 10-4 to 10-3. Do I think he made Oregon better? Yes, I'm going to get to that here in a couple minutes once I finish up laying out this thought. But I think Oregon was better in 2022, but they weren't light years ahead of where they were the season prior. There were coaching mishaps a season ago that led to Oregon not realizing their full potential as a team. We saw those against Oregon State and Washington. You can blame whoever or whatever you would like, but you can't just overlook the head coach. And you shouldn't be afraid, I don't think, to criticize the head coach and say, man, Oregon State ran the ball, could not throw it, and we didn't eventually just put 8 guys in the box and load up against the run. Like they were running like 2 plays. It was like zone left and zone right, and they were moving the ball up and down the field at will. At some point in time, the head coach who's on the headset and has the authority at any point in time probably to make a defensive play call has got to be able to make some adjustments there. It doesn't mean he's a bad coach. It means he had a bad day. It means the team had a bad day, had a really unfortunate day, had an unfortunate day against Washington. But when I look at what Oregon put together a season ago and what they're doing on the recruiting trail now, the recruiting is certainly higher than the results were in the first season. And the results were quite good. But the recruiting is very good. But I don't value recruiting as much as on-season results. I give that more weight because at the end of the day, that's what matters most of all. So Lanning has a great opportunity and is setting himself up to move up, in my view, on this list. But right now, I've watched Chip Kelly institute a turnaround at a program that was not in a good place when he took it over. I've seen and is the number 2 program in his own city. I've seen Jonathan Smith turn around a disastrous Oregon State team that's the number 2 program in their own state and just did something that hasn't been done since 2006. I watched Kalen DeBoer go from 4 wins to 11 wins in year 1, and I watched Lincoln Riley go from 4 wins to 11 wins. Lanning went from 10-4 to 10-3. It's good. It's solid. But it is not, in my view, as positive, exciting, and exceptional as what those other coaches have done. And part of that is, yes, and why you shouldn't necessarily worry about hearing me say this sort of stuff. Part of it is definitely that he's only been there for 1 season. And his 1 season was not as spectacularly great as Kalen DeBoer and Lincoln Riley's first season. He had a good first year by any measure, right? We saw what happened with Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Lanning is clearly good at retaining talent, at bringing in talent, at coaching talent, at winning football games. We were all there for the 8-game win streak. We were all there for the Holiday Bowl win. We all watched them beat Utah after they'd housed us twice in a 3-week span the season prior. These are all tangible signs of progress compared to the prior year. But has he made that great, excellent, amazing, exciting step yet? Not yet. But with the way that he's recruiting, if that keeps up for a couple years and he makes some, adjustments here and there on, managing a couple games that didn't go our way. He also managed one game in which we were down, we should have lost and won, right? It's easy to overlook that, right? Like, we easily could have lost the Utah game. Didn't. We easily could have lost the Washington State game. Didn't. Every other game, we probably should have won by a hefty amount, and we did win by a hefty amount against Colorado. That was honestly one of the biggest, most encouraging signs for me in year one with Lanning was, wow, it's nice to blow out teams again. It's nice to have a big lead against BYU and Cal and Arizona and Stanford and Colorado. And it's nice. It's nice to not have to sweat over every game. Some are going to be stressful. Some go your way, some don't. Utah and Washington State did. Oregon State and Washington didn't. Then North Carolina did in the bowl game as well. So, curious as to your thoughts. If you think I'm out of my gourd, and the Locked On hosts who voted in this poll are as well, drop your thoughts in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter at smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. So, this question, of course, which is a mailbag question. Now, you may be wondering if you're new here, not an everydayer, can I be a part of the mailbag? Why, yes, you can. Each of those 3 venues that I just mentioned, mediums is probably the better word, YouTube, Twitter, other Twitter, DMs and mentions, comments, whatever. Eric comes in and asks, if we were to play Georgia today at Autzen, what do you think would happen? I have a hard time believing it would be 49-3 again, but I am not confident we would win, which leads me to a follow-up. Usually home field advantage is 3 points. I think Autzen is worth 5 or 6. Yeah, Autzen statistically over the last, 15 years has been one of the best home field advantages in all of college football, which has been fantastic. And shout out to all you Duck fans for making that a reality for the Ducks across several coaching staffs and star players and everything. Duck fans have been there, and Autzen is consistently a tough place to win. But, if we played Georgia, yeah, we're a better football team. It would not be 49-3. Bo Nix would not be as sloppy as he was at times in that Georgia game, I don't think. Do I think the Bulldogs are going to win? Yeah, the Bulldogs are still going to win. Would it be 49-3? No. Because I think Oregon is faster. I think they're better coached. I think Bo Nix is a better version of himself than he was in that game. I think Oregon is a better overall team. And I think that Dan Lanning, having 13 games under his belt as a head coach is going to be a lot different than when he had 0 games under his belt as a head coach. And the other thing, too, is, is Georgia as talented as they were a season ago? Probably not. They're still crazy talented, or probably going to go undefeated or 11-1 in their regular season schedule this year. But no, I don't feel like, especially if it were at Autzen, it'd be 49-3. But do I feel like, if we played that same Georgia team, like if you took that Georgia team that just went undefeated and won the national championship, and you put it against this Oregon team, yeah, it wouldn't be 49-3, but it'd probably be like 42-28 if we're lucky. Oregon actually moved the ball in that game. That's an easy thing to forget. We just kept stumbling in the red zone, which, by the way, continued to be an issue as the season went on. Games like Washington State, late in the year against Oregon State, of course, had some trouble down there. So, yeah, it'd be closer, but would the defense be? I think the defense would probably be capable, even against that Stetson Bennett team that had Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers and all those guys and whatnot. I think they'd be able to keep them under 40, but I don't know if we would reach 30. I think you'd be looking like best case scenario, like maybe 38-21, 38-24, kind of in that range, because that was just a crazy good team. But Oregon is better. If you took that same Georgia team, yeah, it'd probably be closer, but I don't think we're at the point where we win, which is why college football is a build. It's a grind. It's why on my coaching criteria, I've got recruiting as the second most important thing. Because you have to have if you're going to win at a high level, enough good players to win at a high level. You got to be able to go toe-to-toe with the best teams in the country if you want to match up with them in the college football playoff for the national championship picture. So, no, I do not think we would win. Yes, I think it could be closer, but would I expect, a nail-biter? Probably not, because clearly, whether it's talent or coaching or probably a combination of the two, there was a long way to go. There was a long way to go for the Ducks to get there. And that's okay. That's okay. Rome was not built in a day. Great ribs are not cooked in an hour. You got to give it some time. So, good question, though. Let's hop to a basketball topic here. So, Devan Cambridge was going to come to Oregon from Arizona State. We talked about him here on the show a couple times. And I thought he would kind of fit into that Quincy Guerrier role, who has gone elsewhere. And Devan Cambridge, who a year ago was a 50% field goal shooter, averaged just under 10 points a game, shot at 33% from beyond the arc at Arizona State, is now going to Texas Tech. It's pretty odd. We've seen high school football recruits flip. I don't know that I've seen a basketball transfer portal player flip without a major coaching change. I've seen that before. Like Kirk Kriisa transferred from Arizona to West Virginia and then put his name back in the portal because Bob Huggins got fired. And now he's deciding whether or not he wants to stay out there. I understand that, but this is a curious one. I don't have any insight here as to what happened or what changed. I think it's a bummer because he's, a 6'6" guy, like small forward, power forward type, can stretch the floor a little bit, really solid player. It does, however, create an opportunity that I hope Dana Altman and company will capitalize on. And I believe, to my knowledge, they have 2 scholarship spots available. And look, we'll see what Jadrian Tracy does, the JUCO transfer, who's a sharpshooter. But I think if it came down to like playing time, minutes, other players, I think this could be twofold. Number one, Kario Akendo is coming over from Georgia. Now, he's only 6'4", but, guard, wing, positionless players are a really, really common thing. We've seen Oregon kind of employ that before. Maybe Akendo and Cambridge weren't both going to see heavy minutes. I think that could be a factor here. And, I'm not sitting here saying Oregon wanted to lose him per se. I am saying, though, I hope they go out in the portal and find a sharpshooter, because we talked all last season. Oregon's biggest problem all season long was they didn't hit threes. They did not hit them consistently. And I identified it pretty early in the season, and it continued to bear itself out, which was if Oregon hits threes, they're probably going to win. And if they don't, there's a high probability they lose. And every game you looked at where Oregon won the three-point line, they had I don't remember what their exact record was, but in every big win they had last year, it seemed like they were at least hitting threes, if not winning the three-point battle. And Cambridge is a guy who can step out and shoot, but he's not a high-level shooter. I would love to see Oregon have a guy, at least one guy, preferably 2 or 3, but at least one guy who can shoot high 30s, low 40s from beyond the arc. Now, Kuznard a year ago, I think was around 34, 35%, and his shooting percentage actually increased after coming over from South Carolina. So I think that he is on an upward trajectory in that sense. But if he's somewhere in the mid-30s, I'm good with that. Keyshawn Bartholomew, once he got into Pac-12 play, he was about 37% from 3. That's really, really good. If Cambridge is not going to be here, which he isn't, right? He's going to Texas Tech. I would love to see Oregon go out and find a guy who can just be a reliable knockdown shooter. Because, think about it this way with regards to Oregon football. What were they bad at last year defensively? Getting pressure on the quarterback. They had a historically low rate of sacks. What did they do? They went out, and this is good coaching and player personnel and, scouts and everybody that's in that department for the Ducks and on staff with Lanning and company. They went out and they improved dramatically and directly what they were struggling at a year ago. They identified the problem, corrected it. Dana Altman's team, They weren't a good three-point shooting team last year. They lose Quincy Guerrier, who was a solid three-point shooter. Not great, but solid. And they brought in Cambridge and Akendo, who are not sharpshooters, who are not big-time three-point shooters. So hopefully this creates an opportunity for that to happen because we just need more shooting. We needed more pressure a year ago. We went out, got Jordan Birch, Mateo Uyunglele. You bring back Popo Amavai. Those are tangible steps forward towards addressing the issue. So hopefully it's a blessing in disguise. I'm curious to see what happens with the roster here for the Ducks with that slot opening up. But that news was surprising to say the least. Cambridge committed a while ago, and there are a lot of back alley conversations and texting chains that go on in college sports nowadays. I have no idea what led to this one. I have no idea what went down there. I just know the situation on the ground is, yeah, that's a bummer. That's a surprise. But we can capitalize and make the most, right? Make lemonade out of lemons. Always the best course of action. Adding a big-time shooter, I think, would do just that. Speaking of food, which is lemons, that was a half-decent transition. Like, not great, but not great. A couple of fun questions to wrap up today's show. I love these questions, by the way. I think they're a lot of fun when you ask me kind of about, me, my personality, what I like, or anything like that. I'm always down to answer that kind of stuff. I won't go like too personal, but I'm kind of an open book here, just like a little bit, So ask away. This one is not super serious though. This is from Blazer Duck, an everydayer out there, and everydayers. Blazer Duck is such an everydayer. The other everydayers know who he is. Legend. Spencer, do you have a traditional game day meal you must have each week? If not, what is your ideal game day meal? To the T, my man. We are both foodies, so I got to know. So I do not have a traditional game day meal, but if I had to identify an ideal game day meal, I'm kind of parlaying this into a separate food-related question because this would be kind of my ideal game day, like Oregon football game day meal. This one came in from Bud. He said, if you're hosting a tailgate party, what is on the McLaughlin menu? What are your 3 top stadium food items that you have enjoyed and where were they? Post game, what is your ideal celebratory meal following a big win? I don't have a meal tradition for after Oregon games, but I'll start real quick with the top 3 stadium foods. All at T-Mobile Park, by the way. I've had these in various places throughout T-Mobile Park. I've been fortunate enough to venture through basically the best food that park has to offer. That's the home of the Seattle Mariners, for those of you who don't know. Top 3 stadium foods there. Garlic fries. So money. All the time, forever and always. Tacos al pastor. Crazy good. The chef who made it was making them live, and he was cooking up the meat on the flat top, took the tortilla, heated it up, and rubbed it around in the grease of the meat, and then had that to kind of permeate the flavor throughout the inside of the taco. Big brain play. And then dessert-wise, I had to throw it in there. I've also had this Mexican pot de creme that was like chef's kiss, outstanding stuff. But my ideal game day meal, if I were putting together a tailgate party, what would I have on there? I think to get things going, I'm going chips and homemade guac, one of my favorites. I'm going bruschetta bites. I got to say that correctly because my mom is learning to speak Italian. She already speaks a pretty good amount, and that's how you say it, not bruschetta, bruschetta, right? Those would be my top 2 appetizers there. Then, main course, barbecue pork sliders with coleslaw. Finger food, easy to go around, delicious. I love the balance of, a good like King's Hawaiian roll, for instance. That's not a paid sponsorship. They're just delicious. King's Hawaiian roll, good, juicy, sweet, tender pork. Get a little bit of bite into that coleslaw. Good thing to do with coleslaw in there to give it a little bit of extra oomph is to put some really thinly sliced apples into it. Really, really good. I would go grilled corn on the cob. That's the best vegetable on planet Earth. You won't convince me otherwise. And then the other thing I'd have complementing that plate, the most fresh Oregon berries imaginable. Earlier today, I had a Marion berry milkshake, and I can't get that anywhere but the state of Oregon. And it's one of the reasons I love being home for the summer for sure. We're right back into locked on food, just like Ryan Winter says, by the way. And then dessert, something that I've made several times and made for a Super Bowl party my housemate and I hosted earlier this year. Chocolate mousse cups. You go homemade chocolate mousse, layer of whipped cream, take a fudge-covered Oreo, stick it in there for a little garnish, maybe shave a little chocolate on top as well. That That is a game day spread that satisfies everybody. Picky eaters, non-picky eaters, you got everything you need in there. So that'd be my ideal game day meal, is if I'm hosting that tailgate party, give me chips and guac, bruschetta bites, right? Nice little bruschetta, which for those of you who don't know, is an Italian concoction, tomato base essentially, herbs, garlic and whatnot, blend it together a little bit and get a little balsamic on top. Put that on top of a really nice, lightly toasted with olive oil, of course, crostini. That is a prime time appetizer bite. Barbecue pork sliders with coleslaw, with the sliced apples in there to give it that little extra punch. Grilled corn on the cob, outstanding, especially on a summer or fall day. Oregon berries and chocolate mousse cups. I ate dinner before I came on here, and guess what? I'm hungry. Hope you are too. Hope you're hungry for another episode, because it's coming tomorrow. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.